The Supreme Court just issued a 5-4 order which denies the Trump administration's emergency request, which would stop $2 billion of improper foreign aid payments. This case has major implications for everyone in America, and essentially, it's something that will affect directly the money that you paid as a taxpayer. So let's break down what is happening. Now, before we break down what happened in this Supreme Court order, I just want to do something a little bit different. If you guys are interested and if you're willing to, please share this video, share it on X, share it on Instagram. Feel free to chop this up and share it on TikTok and other places, and maybe even tag some important people who want a comprehensive breakdown of this type of information, because I know this is a very important topic that a lot of people are talking about. Tag people like Joe Rogan, Tim Pool, all those individuals who maybe would get help from a more comprehensive breakdown of what the Supreme Court just ordered. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we're going to be discussing the very important case in the recent order that was just issued by the Supreme Court. This challenge involves the Trump administration's efforts to stop an order that was requiring them to pay about $2 billion of monetary waste that was going to foreign aid. This case resulted from the Trump administration and DOJ cleaning house and pulling some aid that was going improperly to various organizations and going to different countries, and just all the monetary waste that was happening at the federal government level. Well, the Supreme Court just issued an order denying an emergency application to vacate a lower court order, which essentially circumvented the Trump efforts to stop these types of payments. And essentially the order of the lower court is requiring the US government to pay about $2 billion in payments that are claimed to have already been, performed. These organizations say that they have already done this work, and so they want those $2 billion in payment. This was a 5-4 order by the Supreme Court, and in the decision, Justice Barrett and Roberts jumped the line to once again join the liberal justices on the Supreme Court to issue this order. Now, in response to this, there was a dissent from Justice Alito, and that was joined by Thomas, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh. Now, we need to break down what happened in this case prior to the Supreme Court's order here, and what is the procedural posture of this case and what happens now going forward. Now, the plaintiffs in this case are a group of American businesses and nonprofits that receive foreign assistance funds from the State Department and USAID. They filed a lawsuit claiming that the current administration's temporary pause on foreign assistance payments was in fact unlawful. On February 13th, 2025, the district court reviewing this case issued something known as a temporary restraining order, also known as a TRO, and that required that the government here had to halt the funding pause. So in essence, they would have to make payments. The district court claimed that the plaintiffs are likely to succeed in showing that the federal government here, the Trump administration, violated the Administrative Procedures Act, also known as the APA. So the APA has some requirements, some administrative procedures that you have to go through, and the district court believed that the Trump administration did not meet those requirements. Now, after issuing the TRO, the district court judge here was frustrated by the fact that the Trump administration was not moving as fast as he wanted. And in response to that, on February 25th, he issued a second order which required that the federal government have to pay out approximately $2 billion. The federal government argued that they couldn't do that they shouldn't be forced to do that within 24 hours, that it violated sovereign immunity, that they had the discretion to determine how and when they would pay out this money under the TRO, but the district court denied that, didn't believe that the federal government could dictate that, and instead he issued an order saying you have to pay the $2 billion within 24 hours. Now, he also did some very interesting things in that new order trying to enforce his TRO. First, he labeled the new order as non-appealable. And second, he demanded that the money essentially be paid within a day. This left the Trump administration little time to try to obtain some review of what he regarded as a lawless order of the district court. The Trump administration moved for a stay pending appeal to that judge in the district court, but of course that district court judge denied that, said, no, I issued this new order, you must pay the $2 billion. One of the main concerns of the Trump administration, and one of the things they brought up in their request, is if they were forced to pay the $2 billion, there is no way they could ever get it back. Now, after that denial of the district court, the Trump administration quickly filed an appeal up to the United States Courts of Appeals for the District of Columbia. But with only about 4 hours left and on that deadline when the Trump administration and the federal government would have to make those payments, the Courts of Appeal there, which was reviewing this, decided that no, this is non-appealable. The lower court said it's a non-appealable TRO, and so they denied the request of the Trump administration. And at that point, with nowhere else to go, no way to appeal this further at the appellate court level, and with the deadline fast approaching, the Trump administration asked the Supreme Court there to intervene on an emergency basis. They filed an emergency application for Supreme Court review. And at the last moment, the Chief Justice in the Supreme Court issued an administrative stay, which temporarily blocked what the district court said in their order. And it only temporarily blocked it for the time period where the Supreme Court would consider the emergency application and determine whether or not they would actually review the case and the request to vacate the lower court order. Unfortunately, now the Supreme Court has issued their decision. They've issued their order. It was a 5-4 order, which essentially is just a denial of the emergency application to vacate what the lower court said. As a result of that emergency denial, the government here must pay about $2 billion immediately, not because any law requires it, but only because a rogue district court has ordered it in trying to enforce its TRO. Now, the order of the Supreme Court states that the application is denied. So that is really the order of the court here. And then they go on to state that given that the deadline in the challenged order has now passed, and in light of the ongoing preliminary injunction proceedings, the district court should clarify what obligations the government must fulfill to ensure compliance with the temporary restraining order, with due regard for the feasibility of any compliance timelines. And they're essentially saying that the lower court now has this and they need to come up with a new order and a new timeline for the payment of those $2 billion. So what does this order of the Supreme Court do? First, in essence, it's a denial order. The Supreme Court denied the emergency application to review what the district court said in its order. But the practical impact of that denial is that the district court's order still stands. In the decision, the Supreme Court does state that the February 26th compliance deadline that was originally set in that order has passed at this point, and because of that, they ordered the district court to clarify what the government must now do to comply with the TRO. The Supreme Court also claims it must give due regard to the feasibility of any compliance orders that it now issues going forward. Now, I doubt that will happen since the district court judge thought that he had the power to demand that the US government would need to pay $2 billion within about 36 hours, really just a day of his order that he issued prior. So the judge there already thought that, a single day was enough feasibility and time to do this type of, payment. And I don't suspect that, he will change his directive going forward. Now, like I mentioned, Justice Alito did dissent, and it was joined by Thomas, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh. The dissent states that today the court makes a most unfortunate misstep that rewards an act of judicial hubris and imposes a $2 billion penalty on American taxpayers. The district court has made plain its frustration with the government, and respondents raised serious concerns about non-payment for completed work. But the relief ordered is quite simply too extreme a response. The federal court has many tools to address a party's supposed nonfeasance. So what does this mean now? What happens from here? Well, per the Supreme Court's order, the district court is now ordered to clarify how the United States government must comply with its TRO. This will likely result in a new order from the district court setting an arbitrary deadline when the $2 billion must be paid by the Trump administration. Also, there is currently a preliminary injunction motion that is being reviewed by the same district court. The preliminary injunction would be slightly longer in duration since it would block the Trump administration from halting these payments until the district court rules on the final merits of this case. Keep in mind that the TRO here that was originally issued by the district court was supposed to be just a temporary stopgap, but now the organizations here want a longer preliminary injunction that would allow them to keep getting paid during the entire duration of the lawsuit, which in practical sense could be for years because we know that these lawsuits often take multiple years to work their way through the process. So those are the two things we're going to be looking at going forward. What is the clarifying order of the district court now because the Supreme Court denied review of the application? And what is the new deadline for these payments going forward? The other thing we're going to be looking at is how does the preliminary injunction play out? What is the district court going to rule on the preliminary injunction? So I know a lot of people are talking about the Supreme Court order. The Supreme Court order was 5-4. You have Barrett and Roberts jump the line and join the liberals once again. And really at stake with that order was about $2 billion in taxpayer money that is potentially now going to be forced to be paid just because this one rogue district court judge decided that he could force the United States government to make those payments. Now, this case is very far from over. Like I mentioned, there's still a preliminary injunction that is going to be issued. The new order is going to be issued in light of what the Supreme Court said. And I have no doubt that after that, these will now be appealed once again to the Supreme Court. So that's what's going on. Like I mentioned, share this around to maybe your favorite people out there in the social media sphere. Get them this information, because I think this is a little bit more comprehensive breakdown of what the order actually said, what it does, and what happens now going forward. So as always, thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and never forget this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.